This video is brought to you by Raycon. You know what I really love? One-man bands. Nah, really, it's incredible because it's one thing being able to play a musical instrument, and it's another thing being able to play like half a dozen musical instruments, but it's something entirely different being able to play a ton of instruments at the same time. I can't help but admire multi-talented people in my capacity as a particularly talented person. Still working out what that talent is. To stretch an analogy further than any one man should, if a full orchestra is a giant game development team numbering in the thousands, then the one-man band is the game that was made by one person. Or maybe the one-man dev team can be compared to those songs where one person layers all of their instruments on top of each other without having to play them at the same time? Could you imagine having to code a game at the very same time as writing music and drawing art? We'd end up with an awful lot of weird stuff. So my aim here is to shed some light on the individuals behind some pretty incredible games and what type of games you end up with when you've only got one person working on it. I mean, most of them are indie games since everyone seems inspired enough to take the plunge these days, but history shows that this has happened all throughout gaming history for a variety of very interesting reasons that I will be regurgitating from Wikipedia for your viewing pleasure today. Probably with a lot of brown nosing as well, because I've always wanted to make a game, but I'm not sure I've got enough aptitude to do it all myself. I mean, I could probably code, and I've got a musical background so I can make the music, but I could never do the artwork. I can draw a great butt though. Despite the nature of the one-man development and the reputation it has now as a cornerstone of the indie games market, it's hardly a trope that's only sprung up in the last decade or so. In fact, before video games truly entered the mainstream and large companies realized that there was money to be made from this budding industry, a lot of very early video games were made by just one person, using whatever code they could loosely shape into a video game. Some of the most iconic and important games of all time were the result of one guy working hard to get the most out of wacky new technology. But while I could easily talk about the likes of Pong or Space Invaders, I think the story of Atari's adventure is far more interesting. Atari games had such a fun naming convention back in the day, and I think Adventure is one of the best of them all, because it's both terrible at describing what the game is, but also the game itself is so simplistic and so basic that it does actually describe what you're doing in the game. You're this little coloured square, and you adventure for the period of the game. It was 1979, it was a simpler time, don't question it. But the fun thing about Adventure is how much character this game has. You might not think it when it looks like this and sounds like a library being interrupted by crunchy text notifications. But if you pay close enough attention, you can detect creator Warren ROBINETT's influence everywhere you go. This wasn't the first game that ROBINETT made, but it came out at a time when he knew that Atari didn't want to credit any of their designers out of fear that they'd become famous and charge more for their services. As a result, he made what many have decided is the first Easter egg in popular culture, really, by inserting a credit for himself if you know where to look. Not only that, but Adventure is influential in a number of other ways, like how the fact that the game is split up into screens was likely an influence for games like the original Legend of Zelda, or the idea of enemies chasing you through rooms and an interconnected environment. Thanks for that one. It's been used a ton in the past to scare the hell out of me, but do you know what scares me these days? Wires. All the wires in the world. Don't look at that. That's why I'm proud to say this video is sponsored by Raycon and their premium quality wireless headphones. All my life I've been looking for wireless headphones that don't lose any sound quality, and when Raycon said they were interested in sending me a pair, I found exactly that. These discreet headphones come in a wide variety of colours, and with celebrity endorsements from Melissa Etheridge, Cardi B and my boy Snoop Dogg, you can look fashionable as you dance the night away. Raycon headphones start at roughly half the price of any other premium wireless earbuds on the market, and yet sound just as good as any of these more expensive brands, so there's a lot to like about them. The model they sent me, the E25, is their latest and their best one yet, with 6 hours of playtime, seamless Bluetooth pairing, more bass and a more compact design that gives you a nice noise isolating fit. Mine's blue, and I like blue. You charge them in this neat little USB case, and these ones even have a small microphone so you can use them for phone calls. So make sure you click the link in the description below to get 15% off your order, and go to buyraycon.com/RabbidLuigi to get your Raycons today. Death to wires. Atari might not have wanted Warren's name out there, but it's just as well that it did get out there, because otherwise I'd have a game made by one person, but no name to attach to it. That would undermine most of the point of this video a bit, don't you think? Before gaming became mainstream, development of games was sometimes a byproduct of doing something else. Of course it was, because in the very early days there was no hard and fast rule for making video games, and most of them came about because of experimentation with technology. Case in point is the story of ALEXEY, a Russian computer engineer who was working as an artificial intelligence researcher for the Soviet Academy of Sciences in the mid-1980s. And as a part of his research, he started making simple games with whatever tech he had to hand. Before long, he was making electronic puzzle games in the style of physical puzzle games that he enjoyed in his childhood, and then BAM! Tetris was born! It was so popular among Pajitov's colleagues that they suggested releasing it commercially, but to do so, he'd have to tackle the Soviet government, which wasn't super happy with itself in the 1980s. Tetris came out in 1984, which was only 2 years before Chernobyl blew up. It's a fun time to be making games in Russia. Tetris is a remarkable game, since its simplicity allowed it to become the best-selling game of all time before Minecraft came along, and that's an unbelievable achievement for a game made by one guy that was licensed by the Russian government. Sadly, that last detail meant that Pajitnov didn't make a lot of money from Tetris until 1996, when the rights reverted to him, after which he founded the Tetris company, and the rest is history. I feel like I don't need to describe why Tetris is so good, because everyone watching this has already played some of it, and over the years it's been through so many variations and updates while still retaining the core elements that have remained the same since the 1980s. Tetris 99, released earlier this year, proved that Tetris still has relevancy all these years later, and I think it's a pretty incredible endorsement of what Pajitnov managed all those years ago. And if you haven't played Tetris 99 yet, a game that translates this idea into a multiplayer battle royale format where you can lose in seconds, what have you been doing all year? I mean, I've been busy finding out how bad I really am at Tetris, and shit, I run a moderately successful YouTube channel, I should be good at this! Tetris, falsely inflating self-confidence and gaming ability since 1984. It's really good, trust me. Not too long ago I was talking about RPGs and how the accessibility of the genre means that anyone can make one. It's not a particularly complicated genre unless you want to make it that way, and there are so many tools and applications that allow the average person every opportunity to craft the RPG of their choosing. This all means that there have been hundreds of RPGs that were made by one guy in a coffee break, and so wading through this giant pile of basic RPGs is a tall task for anyone to undertake. Then again, we've got Undertale now, so why even bother? I still remember a time when Undertale was a fresh, new, exciting video game that everyone wasn't sick of, and was actually providing new perspectives on the RPG genre. It also showed what one guy can do with inspiration from the likes of Earthbound and the Mario and Luigi games and the bullet hell of Toho. It makes one hell of a tasty looking buffet. And this is all wonderful, makes for a very special kind of game that exudes so much confidence in its own skin, but there's a problem. Toby Fox may have been the main driving force behind Undertale and sole credit given on Wikipedia, but you can't forget that Temi Chang had a large influence on the game's art. She's also the cat thing. So it all depends on how much emphasis you want to place on artists, and I really don't want to be that guy who undermines the effort of artists everywhere, because I really admire what they do, and they get enough shit without me adding to it. So by all metrics I should discount Undertale, since Toby Fox had help from Temi Chang, and to say otherwise would diminish the work of artists everywhere, but my potentially flimsy argument is that an artist doesn't directly contribute to the development of a game, and since Toby did some artwork of his own, I can say that Undertale was technically made by Toby Fox alone. And damn, I forget how great this game is sometimes. We had a bit of Undertale overexposure for a while there, but it's such an intelligently designed game that revolutionized turn-based combat, while also possessing some great writing that generates some truly incredible moments that will live long in the memory. Undertale made me feel things that few games have ever made me feel, and the fact that one man was mostly responsible for this is kind of crazy. I'm now waiting on some more Deltarune, hoping that it can do the same for me. Just give me more Fluffy Boy. You get a really powerful sense of motivation when you're the only one working on a project. Now, I understand that large teams of development staff who are all working towards the same game and they know what kind of game that needs to be is likely to create something equally great, if not greater, but genuine labours of love can create some truly incredible experiences. Because you can't put a price on passion. The rising indie scene has allowed aspiring creators to make the kinds of games that they've always wanted to. Yes, this can take the shape of original creations that pluck ideas from the wildest corners of deranged minds, but I've always been interested in spiritual successors. Is a game series that you like dead or so dormant that it might as well be dead at this point? Then why don't you make a pseudo-sequel yourself that takes ideas from the original game but does so under a new label so you don't get into legal trouble, but you can still give the world a brand new game in the same style as the original? I fucking love these and will always have time for them. Especially if it's a spiritual successor to a farming franchise with rigor mortis. Stardew Valley is the breath of fresh air that the world needed in 2016. Never mind all the celebrity deaths, Harvest Moon was very much past its best before date by the time that Stardew Valley started doing the rounds. I remember playing one of the 3DS Harvest Moons a few years before Stardew Valley entered my life, and hey, it ain't bad, but it's not really on the same level as the games I grew up with. More so than other spiritual successors, Stardew Valley feels like a passionate love letter to everything that was so enjoyable about classic Harvest Moon games, and it's even more remarkable that something this richly detailed and beautifully crafted came from one guy, Eric Barone. Eric brought this game together out of an understandable disappointment that Harvest Moon games aren't what they once were, but also out of an admission that none of these games have ever been quite as good as they should be. That might explain why Stardew Valley is significantly better and more ambitious than any Harvest Moon game, and even bold enough to give you the option of developing a relationship with a subscribe button, which reminds me of how you can subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're enjoying this video, and click the bell for notifications of every new upload. Ultimately, Stardew Valley ranks as one of the single most impressive unofficial series revivals that pays a ton of respect to the original series while also doing what so few spiritual successors do, and that's not settling for just being like what inspired it. Why play Harvest Moon when Stardew Valley is available on every platform and can be taken wherever you go thanks to the Switch port? It's like a dream come true. With anything like this, there's always an origin point that proved that all of this was possible. I don't necessarily mean the first person to ever make a video game on their own, since that was probably the first person to ever make a video game period, but you can't deny that this current trend of individuals taking it upon themselves to make a game on their own stems from something a little more recent than the 1980s. People get inspired from different places and for different reasons, but I'd wager that a lot of current indie developers can trace back their inspiration to a quirky little platformer from the mid-2000s. And the reality is that without Cave Story, we don't get a ton of other games. I can't remember what I was doing in 2004, but I do know what I was doing in 1999. I was 4, and I was very busy doing everything that a 4-year-old does, which is a very long list that unfortunately doesn't include development of a dynamic retro platformer. It's okay though, because Daisuke AMAYA was busy making his own video game in his free time, something that already is pretty challenging if you were to fiddle around with something like Unity or even attempt to extract the most out of RPG Maker, but Daisuke didn't really have those tools. That's why Cave Story is a game made from AMAYA's own game engine that he built from scratch in C++, which is a bit like building your own musical instrument because you really want to play the French horn. Not sure what hobbies were available in Japan around the turn of the millennium, but Daisuke AMAYA effectively invented one, which is pretty wild. Perhaps what I like the most about Cave Story's development is how AMAYA has since shared what he learned about game design with aspiring indie developers. He didn't have any experience of game development before he started on Cave Story, so it's all self-taught, but he's given talks about why environments are laid out the way they are, and how main character Quote was designed with recognizable features so he would pop against a background of dark caves. It's extremely valuable knowledge, and without a doubt it helped to shape the indie game scene as we know it today, and it's pretty rampant at the moment. Not to mention that Cave Story was free to download when it first came out. Of all the trends to pick up, where did that one go? This is RabbidLuigi, and only at the end have I worked out how I was ranking these games, because Cave Story is a great game, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's better than Undertale or Stardew Valley, or even something like Tetris. However, DAISUKE and AMAYA, in creating this game, proved that this was possible. It's arguably the most important game for solo developers ever created, and I have no idea how many people he's inspired over the years. Not me, but I'm just lazy. Have you got a topic that you'd like me to talk about next week? Make sure you leave a comment about that down below, because I'll be taking the most interesting suggestions and making a poll on the next video. In fact, here's one right now that I prepared from last week. I'll be revealing the winner of the poll on Twitter and taking suggestions for games to talk about that are related to that topic. So feel free to follow me over there so we can keep in touch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.